It was a cold, cutting night in Toronto, the kind where the damp air sinks right into your bones and makes you wish you were anywhere but outside. But for Sienna Mallory, being outside felt like a terrifying, impossible dream, and right now she'd trade anything just to be hidden and safe. Sienna wasn't some dramatic movie heroine. She was an everyday woman, a fantastic baker with a small shop near Queen Street West, known for her incredible lavender shortbread. She was also someone who had made one bad decision, falling for Colton Ray. Colton wasn't just a bad boyfriend. He was a walking storm cloud, and lately the storm had turned violent. Just an hour ago he had been pounding on her door, screaming threats so loud the neighbors in her small brick apartment building probably thought they were listening to a horror show. Sienna knew the drill. You don't argue, you don't fight, you just run. She was wearing a thick oversized wool sweater, the sleeves pulled down past her knuckles, and a pair of faded jeans. Her hair, a deep chestnut color, was pulled back quickly in a messy knot that was already starting to come loose. If you looked closely at her face, you'd see the exhaustion beneath the smudges of panic, the dark circles under eyes that were usually bright, now wide and searching for an escape. She carried nothing but her keys and a small worn phone tucked into her back pocket. She ran because she needed to breathe, and Colton had stolen all the air. She darted down the narrow, dimly lit alleyway behind her building, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The only sound louder than her heart hammering against her ribs was the sound of her own sneakers slapping against the wet asphalt. Colton was fast, but Sienna was desperate. She spotted the basement access door to an adjacent, older apartment complex. It was a metal door painted a miserable shade of peeling green, usually bolted shut, but tonight, by some miracle, or maybe just sloppy maintenance, it was propped open, a crack held by a rusty wedge. She didn't think, she just pushed it open and tumbled inside, letting the heavy door swing shut behind her with a sickening metallic clang that sounded impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. She found herself in a basement landing that smelled overwhelmingly of dust, old concrete, and something vaguely metallic. The air was thick and cold. She slid down the wall, leaning her head back, trying to quiet the frantic thumping in her chest. I just need a minute, just a minute, she thought, squeezing her eyes shut. She pushed herself up and saw a small recessed door labeled simply, Storage Room B. It looked darker and deeper than the landing. It was the perfect place to hide until she was sure Colton had left. She tiptoed toward it, her hand shaking as she twisted the loose knob. The room inside was barely illuminated by a single caged bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling, throwing long, spooky shadows across the cement floor. It was small, crammed with broken furniture, stacks of old newspapers tied up with twine, and forgotten boxes overflowing with junk. Sienna took one step inside, her foot kicking something soft, and then she froze. Every muscle in her body locked up, and the breath she had finally managed to catch evaporated from her lungs. She wasn't alone. Sitting on an upturned wooden crate in the center of the dusty chaos was a man. He wasn't slumped over or hiding. He was sitting perfectly upright, radiating a stillness that felt more dangerous than any noise Colton could make. This was Rowan Vale. Rowan was not a man you forgot once you saw him, or even one you forgot after hearing his name whispered in the right circles. He was known in the way a fast-approaching storm is known, powerful, inevitable, and cold. He was dressed meticulously, even in a damp basement. He wore a charcoal gray coat that looked expensive and tailored, buttoned neatly over a crisp white shirt. His hair was dark and precisely cut, falling just above the collar of his jacket. What struck Sienna immediately was his face. It wasn't classically handsome, but it was striking. Sharp cheekbones, a strong, unyielding jawline, and a mouth that looked like it hadn't smiled in a decade. But it was his eyes that truly terrified her. They were the color of dark slate, cool and utterly devoid of panic or surprise, even though she had just barged into his private sanctuary. They were fixed on her with the clinical precision of a predator observing prey. Rowan Vale didn't move an inch. The only thing that signaled his presence was the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound surprisingly calm. It wasn't a question, just a simple statement of fact, delivered in an accent that hinted at the tough streets of New York City but was polished by years of quiet authority. Sienna was speechless. Her mind, moments ago consumed with the terror of Colton, was now screaming a completely different kind of warning. This wasn't just a tough guy. This felt like something heavy, something she shouldn't have seen. Her eyes flicked down to what he was doing. Resting on the crate beside him, its handle facing away, was a steel briefcase. It wasn't the kind of aluminum briefcase a lawyer carries. This was heavy-duty reinforced steel, the kind with thick recessed locks. It looked like it could survive a bomb blast. And Rowan wasn't just guarding it. He was wiping it down with a dark cloth, meticulously removing any trace of fingerprints or dust. I'm sorry, Sienna finally managed, the words catching in her throat like sand. I didn't know anyone was in here. I was just hiding. I'll leave. She started to back up slowly, praying he would just let her go. She had stumbled into something that felt impossibly big and dangerous, and all she wanted was to be small and invisible again. Rowan finally shifted. He placed the cloth carefully into his coat pocket and extended his arm slowly, his index finger pointing to the door behind her. You've seen me, he stated, not accusingly but matter-of-factly. You've seen this. And you've heard the door close. You think just walking out is an option now? His eyes didn't waver from hers. They didn't hold malice, just a cold, terrifying calculation. Sienna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Toronto night. She wasn't just hiding from Colton anymore. She was standing opposite a cliff face, and one wrong move would send her plummeting. The quiet, relentless tension in the room was thicker than any fear she had ever felt from her ex. Colton was loud and unpredictable. Rowan was quiet and absolute. Sienna suddenly remembered her own terror, the reason she was in this miserable basement in the first place. The sound of a distant door slamming upstairs made her jump, a sound that she instinctively linked to Colton finding her. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking, her chest heaving. My ex is looking for me. He's dangerous. If you let me go, I promise I won't say a word about anything. I swear. She gestured vaguely at the case. I don't know who you are, I don't know what that is. Just let me hide until he's gone. Rowan looked at her, then down at the briefcase, then back to her. His gaze finally softened, but only a fraction. He wasn't seeing a threat. He was evaluating a nuisance, an unfortunate complication. But then he saw the genuine raw panic in her eyes, the real fear that had nothing to do with him. He looked past her, toward the storage room door, as if listening to the distant noises of the apartment building above them. After a long, agonizing moment that stretched Sienna's nerves to the breaking point, Rowan made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his head toward the back of the cramped room, behind a huge stack of old carpets. Get behind there. Don't move. Don't breathe, he ordered, his voice still low but carrying a quiet urgency. If he finds you here, he'll find me. And that would be bad for everyone, especially him. You understand? Sienna didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled quickly and silently behind the stack of stiff, musty carpets, pulling her body into a small, tight ball. It was dirty, smelly, and terrifying, but suddenly, the presence of the cold-faced man with the steel briefcase didn't feel like a guarantee of death. It felt strangely like the only chance she had. She was now hiding from one danger, protected by a far greater one. Sienna pressed her ear against the carpet, listening to the heavy silence of the storage room, the only sound the slow, deliberate movement of Rowan Vale. She had walked into a mess that was infinitely more serious than her own, but for the first time in an hour she felt a strange, shaky sliver of hope that she might actually survive the night. She was trapped, but she wasn't alone. And for now that was everything. The silence that settled after Sienna hid herself behind the wall of old, dusty carpets was thick and heavy like lead. Outside the storage room, the building was quiet again, the frantic sounds of the night having faded into the usual low hum of an old city sleeping. But inside, the tension crackled, fueled by two people who absolutely should not have been sharing a tiny, filthy basement room. Sienna was tucked so far back she was practically breathing in the carpet fibers. Her heart had settled from a panicked drum solo to a fast, nervous rhythm. She could hear Rowan, or Mr. Vale as she mentally labeled him, moving occasionally, a slight shift of weight on the wooden crate, the faint snick of a metallic sound she couldn't place. He hadn't asked her to leave, and for that small mercy she was terrified but grateful. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes, Rowan spoke again, his voice cutting through the stillness like a razor. He's gone, he stated simply. You can breathe now. Come out. Sienna hesitated. Stepping out meant stepping directly into his line of sight, exchanging the relative safety of the shadows for the cold glare of his scrutiny. But she knew enough not to ignore a command from a man like him. She slowly unwound her limbs, pushing aside a corner of the rigid carpet stack, and emerged, brushing dust motes from her sweater. She stood blinking in the weak, harsh light, trying not to look directly at the steel briefcase that still sat beside him like a silent, armored witness. Rowan hadn't changed position much. He was still the picture of controlled calm, his expensive coat immaculate even in the grime. His dark eyes swept over her from head to toe, a slow, methodical assessment that missed nothing. "Now," he said, leaning forward just slightly, the movement immediately making him seem taller, larger. "Start talking. And I mean everything. Who are you and why did you lead a pursuit to my door?" His tone wasn't raised, but it carried a weight that made her knees feel weak. It was the tone of a man used to instantaneous, detailed answers. "My name is Sienna Mallory," she started, her voice sounding thin and shaky. She swallowed hard, trying to inject some firmness into her voice. "I own a bakery called The Needed Bliss on Queen West. And I didn't lead anyone here. I was running. I lived down the street. That basement door was open and I just needed a place to hide for 2 minutes." She gestured vaguely in the direction of her own neighborhood, the familiar streets of Toronto suddenly feeling miles away. "Running from who?" he pressed. "Colton Ray. My ex-boyfriend. He gets angry." She tried to keep the explanation brief, hoping he'd accept the simple answer. But she knew that in his world nothing was ever simple. Rowan steepled his fingers, resting his chin on them, watching her with those intense, analyzing slate eyes. "Angry? Is that what you call it? People who are just angry don't make women run into cold basements and hide behind rubbish. You're shaking, Miss Mallory." He paused, letting the silence hang, forcing her to confront her own visible fear. "If you lie to me," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register, "you will find yourself facing a problem far more serious than Mr. Ray. Tell me the truth about why you are running." The stark honesty of his threat jolted her, but it also, ironically, made her feel safer telling him the truth than holding it in. She looked down at her hands, which were indeed trembling, and began twisting her fingers together nervously. "He threatened me," she admitted, the words spilling out quickly. "He said he was going to ruin my business. And he was throwing things. He broke my phone before I ran. He's been demanding money since I ended things and he won't leave me alone. He got physical tonight." As she spoke, she unconsciously moved her left hand to cover her right wrist. It was an involuntary reaction, but Rowan Vale was not a man who missed subtle gestures. "Show me your arm," he ordered. Sienna froze, caught off guard. She hated showing weakness, hated having to admit how close Colton had come to hurting her. "It's nothing," she mumbled, trying to pull the long wool sleeve further over her hand. Rowan's tone changed. It didn't become louder, but it became commanding, laced with an unmistakable undercurrent of authority that demanded immediate obedience. "Sienna, show me." Reluctantly, she pushed the cuff back. There, stark against the pale skin of her inner wrist, was the purple-blue shadow of a bruise already starting to bloom where Colton had gripped her too tightly. It wasn't a terrible injury, but it was a clear, ugly marker of violence and control. Rowan's gaze fixed on the bruise. Something shifted in his expression, a fleeting moment of something that looked almost like distaste, or maybe even a flash of grim recognition. The coldness didn't melt away entirely, but the clinical suspicion in his eyes eased, replaced by a strange, hard assessment of a different kind. He straightened up, the movement fluid and controlled. He pulled a thick leather wallet from his inner coat pocket and extracted a crisp $50 bill, a Canadian 50 she noted dimly, and placed it on the crate far from the briefcase. "Take it," he said. "For a taxi. You need to leave this neighborhood immediately. Find a friend, find a hotel. Don't go back to your place tonight." Sienna stared at the money, confused. This was not the reaction she expected. She expected him to tie her up, threaten her, or maybe just shove her out the door. Not an offer of aid, however impersonal. I can't take your money," she stammered. "It's not charity, Miss Mallory," he replied, a touch of impatience creeping into his voice. "It's a transaction. You leave, you forget you ever saw me, you forget this room, and you forget this briefcase." He gave the steel case a light, almost possessive tap with his knuckles. "You stay, you become an unnecessary complication that I will have to handle. And believe me, you don't want to be handled by me. His words, blunt and chilling, made her flinch. Yet beneath the threat there was an unmistakable shift. He wasn't dismissing her anymore. He was giving her an instruction for her own safety, albeit one layered with severe self-interest. He had noticed her injury, and that sight had changed his equation. He clearly had no tolerance for the kind of small, petty violence Colton inflicted. I understand, she said quietly, finally moving to pick up the bill. The paper felt solid and real in her shaky fingers. I won't tell anyone. I promise. I don't want any trouble. Rowan watched her intently as she secured the $50 in her pocket. He didn't offer a reassuring word, just a final, stern warning. Trouble is like rust, Ms. Mallory. Once it starts, it spreads fast. You need to deal with your problem before it destroys your foundation. That man, Colton, was it? He won't stop until he gets what he wants or until someone makes him stop. He pushed himself up from the crate, a tall, imposing figure who suddenly made the storage room feel even smaller. He bent down and picked up the steel briefcase, securing it tightly in one gloved hand. The movement was smooth, practiced, and intimidating. Go. And if you have any sense, you'll never set foot near this building again. Sienna felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with an unsettling warmth. This terrifying man, a criminal hiding secrets behind locked steel, had seen her pain and instead of exploiting it had created a very dangerous temporary shield for her. It was an unexpected moment of strange, dark chivalry. As she made her way toward the door, she paused, turning back one last time. Thank you, Mr. Vale, she whispered. He didn't look at her. He was already checking his coat pockets, preparing to leave his temporary hideout. He just gave a small nod, a dismissal rather than an acknowledgement. Sienna pushed open the heavy green door and slipped out, leaving the cold darkness of the storage room and the imposing figure of Rowan Vale behind. She was still terrified, still running, and now she carried a huge, terrifying secret. But as she walked out into the cold Toronto night, the crisp $50 bill tucked safely in her pocket didn't just feel like money. It felt like a silent, impossible promise of protection from a man who should have been her worst enemy. She felt the fear, yes, but for the first time tonight, beneath the fear, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone powerful had recognized her need for justice. Sienna didn't get far. She was walking quickly down the alleyway, gripping the $50 bill in her pocket like a talisman, trying to process the surreal encounter with Rowan Vale. She had only made it about half a block from the apartment building when she heard it. The frantic, recognizable sound of her name being shouted in the distance. Sienna. You can't hide from me, you hear? Sienna. It was Colton. His voice was rough, fueled by fury and the stubborn belief that he had a right to find her. The sound sent a fresh wave of ice-cold panic through her body. He hadn't given up. He was circling back, checking every dark corner and every unlocked door. She knew she couldn't outrun him if he spotted her. In a moment of pure, panicked instinct, she turned and raced back towards the basement door she had just exited. It was a terrible idea, running back to the very place she had just been warned to leave, but it was the only immediate shelter she knew. She fumbled with the heavy green door and slipped back into the dim basement landing. She didn't pause, she rushed straight to the storage room door, twisting the knob. She burst back into the small, dusty room. Rowan Vale was still there, standing exactly where she had left him, now holding the steel briefcase loosely at his side. He hadn't expected her to return, and the surprise was a rare crack in his controlled demeanor. What in the hell are you doing back here? He hissed, his eyes narrowed to slits. The quiet threat in his voice was immediate and sharp. He's outside. Colton, he's shouting my name. Sienna whispered, her chest heaving, tears of frustration and terror stinging her eyes. I didn't know where else to go. I'm sorry. Just as she finished the desperate plea, they both heard the unmistakable sound of the main basement door, the heavy metal one on the landing, slamming open, followed by a set of heavy, angry footsteps echoing on the concrete. Colton wasn't just searching, he was inside the building. She's gotta be down here, they heard Colton yell, his voice dangerously close now. She can't hide forever. The urgency in the basement landing snapped Rowan into action. The briefcase dropped silently to the floor near the crate. All trace of suspicion and annoyance vanished from his face, replaced by a focused, terrifying readiness. He was no longer dealing with a complicated nuisance. He was dealing with an immediate physical threat to his temporary sanctuary. He didn't speak. He simply crossed the storage room in 2 long silent strides, grabbed Sienna's arm, not in a painful grip like Colton, but with a firm guiding pressure, and pulled her hard behind the nearest tall metal shelving rack. The rack was laden with old paint cans, tools, and thick rolls of wire, casting a deep protective shadow. Sienna was pressed against the cold, grimy metal, her entire body rigid. Rowan was right beside her, his large frame entirely concealing her. She could feel the solid warmth of his body heat, a bizarre sensation of safety emanating from the most dangerous man she had ever met. He leaned in close, his breath brushing her ear. His scent was faint, expensive cologne and the dry smell of cold city air, nothing like the cheap, aggressive smell of Colton. Rowan placed a single firm finger over his own lips, silently demanding absolute quiet. Then slowly, almost impossibly, he drew a small dark object from the inside of his coat. A thin, heavy something that Sienna didn't need to see clearly to understand. The small, quick movement was all it took to confirm that Rowan Vale wasn't just hiding secrets. He was prepared for war. He then pulled his hand back, his body language shifting again. He turned toward the storage room door, his shoulders settling into a posture that was both relaxed and intensely alert. He wasn't hiding anymore, he was waiting. He had transformed from a man guarding a secret to a predator waiting for his prey to walk into the trap. The footsteps paused just outside their storage room door. Sienna could hear Colton's heavy, ragged breathing. He rattled the handle, which was still unlocked. "Sienna!" Colton shouted, his voice muffled slightly by the door. "I know you're in here, you little coward. Where's my money?" The door was then flung open with such violent force that it struck the concrete wall with a loud boom that made Sienna jump despite herself. Colton Ray stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was a big man, bulky with a thick neck, wearing a jacket that was too tight for him. His face was flushed crimson with anger, his eyes wide and wild as he scanned the dim, junk-filled room. "There you are, you," Colton started, his voice thick with malicious triumph as his gaze swept past the shelf and stopped on the only visible person in the room. He stopped dead. The insult caught in his throat. Colton wasn't stupid. He was violent and short-sighted, but he knew danger when he saw it. And the man standing in the storage room, the one who stood like a statue completely unruffled by the sudden intrusion, was the epitome of danger. Rowan Vale hadn't moved an inch from his casual, waiting posture. He hadn't reached for the weapon, he hadn't raised his voice. He simply watched Colton, his slate-colored eyes utterly cold, holding all the silence and menace of a deep winter forest. "Looking for someone?" Rowan asked, his voice low and smooth, a stark contrast to Colton's frantic shouts. His tone suggested he was mildly inconvenienced, like a busy executive whose meeting had been interrupted by a wrong number. Colton's momentum was broken. He squinted into the gloom, taking in Rowan's expensive clothes, the sheer calm of the man and the unsettling stillness of the room. He realized this wasn't some homeless person or a maintenance worker. "Yeah, I am," Colton mumbled, trying to recapture his aggressive posture, puffing out his chest. "I'm looking for my girlfriend. She ran in here. She owes me." Rowan gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I have been here for over an hour. This room has been empty. It's just me and my things." He gestured to the mysterious steel briefcase on the floor. He stepped closer to the crate, placing his hand casually on the briefcase. The subtle move wasn't a threat of violence, but a clear signal of value and ownership. "This space is mine. This business is mine. If you are looking for a woman, you have the wrong place, friend," Rowan continued, the word friend delivered with chilling sarcasm. "And if you insist on interrupting my private business any further, you will quickly discover that I am not a man you want to owe." Colton, for all his bravado, was a bully, and bullies only operate against those weaker than them. Faced with a man radiating such quiet, absolute power, he faltered. He took a nervous glance around the room, feeling the weight of the strange atmosphere. He saw no sign of Sienna. He only saw the immaculate, intimidating figure of Rowan Vale. "Look, sorry man," Colton stammered, his confidence draining away faster than water. "Must be the wrong floor. My mistake." He backed away slowly, his eyes darting to the briefcase one last time, an ugly mixture of greed and fear flickering across his face. He didn't wait for a response. He turned and stumbled out of the storage room, pulling the door shut behind him with a hurried click. His angry footsteps retreated quickly, diminishing down the hallway until they were gone entirely. Silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. Rowan waited a full 30 seconds, his body still rigid, listening intently. Only when he was absolutely certain Colton's heavy presence was gone did he let out a slow, controlled breath. He turned back to Sienna, who was still huddled behind the rack, tears now silently tracking paths through the dust on her cheeks, not from fear of Colton, but from the terrifying realization of what Rowan had just risked for her. He reached out and gently took her arm, pulling her back into the center of the room. He looked at her, his expression a complicated mix of annoyance at the complication and an almost reluctant acknowledgement of her sheer terror. "See," he murmured, his voice now returning to its normal low rumble. "Gone. But you need to understand something, Sienna. You are living your life like prey. He will come back." He walked over to the crate, picked up the briefcase and secured it under his arm. He looked down at the $50 bill he had offered earlier, now crumpled in her pocket. "Take the money," he repeated, "and get on a train to Montreal or a bus to New York. Just make sure he has nothing to follow." He paused, looking at the raw vulnerability in her face. "You don't have to keep running forever, but you have to be smarter than him." Sienna's fear was quickly being replaced by a strange, fierce gratitude. This man, a terrifying mafia boss, had just saved her life, putting his own secret business at risk. "Why?" she asked, the word a tiny gasp. "Why did you do that?" Rowan looked away from her toward the door, his usual cold mask firmly in place. "Because his kind of mess is sloppy," he stated simply, his reason pragmatic and emotionless. "And sloppy attracts attention. My work requires silence and efficiency." He gave a final nod, a clear sign of dismissal. But just before he walked out, he glanced back at her, his eyes holding hers. He didn't offer a smile, but there was a flicker of something in the slate-gray depths. A momentary connection that acknowledged the shared danger and the strange, unwilling alliance they had just formed. "Go home, Sienna," he said, the sternness in his voice surprisingly gentle. "Get some rest. And start figuring out how you are going to get rid of that problem for good." He turned and, with the silent grace of a ghost, Rowan Vale was gone, leaving Sienna alone in the dim, dusty room. The terror of Colton was real, but so was the memory of Rowan's quiet protection. She was still shaken, but as she picked up her sweater and walked out of the basement, she felt a powerful, undeniable surge of hope. A small piece of justice had been won in the dark, and she realized the frightening man had unintentionally handed her the first tool she needed to reclaim her life: the courage to fight back. Sienna walked out of the apartment building's basement and back into the cold Toronto night, but this time the air felt different. It was still chilly, but the paralyzing fear had lifted, replaced by a buzzing, nervous energy. She didn't feel like prey anymore. She felt like a secret keeper. She walked purposefully toward the closest major street, the lights of a 24-hour convenience store offering a beacon of normality. She needed coffee, she needed warmth, and most of all she needed to think. She still had the $50 bill, Rowan's transaction, his payment for her silence, clenched tightly in her palm. She used the money not for a taxi but for a transit pass and a hot cup of tea. She settled into a warm, quiet corner booth at a diner near Gerrard Square, a familiar working-class neighborhood that felt safely distant from the scene of the confrontation. As the steam from the tea warmed her face, she finally let the reality of the last hour wash over her. She had walked in on a mafia boss, been saved from her violent ex by his cold intimidation, and was now carrying a piece of information that could get her, and possibly him, killed. She was just stirring a small packet of sugar into her mug when the diner door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and, much to Sienna's heart-stopping shock, Rowan Vale. He walked straight toward her booth, his movements economical and attracting no undue attention. He slid into the seat opposite her, his expensive coat making a slight swish as he settled. "Don't look surprised, Ms. Mallory," he said, his voice quiet enough that the other few patrons wouldn't hear. "I saw you ducking onto the street a block back. You're terrible at hiding. And you haven't left the neighborhood, which means you don't follow instructions very well either." Sienna's mind raced. I was getting warm. I was just about to leave. I promise." Rowan placed his steel briefcase, the centerpiece of all the danger, on the seat beside him. It was a massive heavy object that seemed utterly out of place next to the faded red vinyl booth and cheap Formica tabletop. "We have a problem," he stated, skipping introductions and small talk. "A new problem, thanks to you having a violent ex who decided to interrupt my timetable." "I'm really sorry about Colton," Sienna began, genuinely contrite. Rowan waved a dismissive hand. "Ray is irrelevant. He's a fly. He won't come near you again for a while, not after he saw me. He'll tell himself I was security, a neighbor, anything to avoid admitting he was scared stiff. But he's still your mess, and you need to clean it up before he starts digging for answers about who scared him off." He leaned closer, his slate eyes serious. "My actual problem is the basement. I wasn't just sitting down there because it was a quiet place to read a book, Sienna. I was there for an exchange. A very important, very precise exchange." Sienna felt a fresh wave of anxiety. "An exchange? For what?" "The briefcase," Rowan said simply, tapping the steel case on the seat next to him. "This isn't mine. It was supposed to be delivered to me by a courier at that exact spot at that exact time. That room is what we call a dead drop. Secure, quiet, and rarely accessed. I was there to check the contents and secure the package." Sienna frowned, trying to keep up with the technical language even though the words were simple. "So, you were waiting for someone to bring you that case?" "Correct. But the exchange was delayed. The courier never arrived, or if they did, they took too long. I heard a noise, not your clumsy footsteps but something earlier. I secured the item myself and waited for the courier to try again." Sienna's brow furrowed. "Wait, if you were waiting for the briefcase, why were you wiping it down when I first came in?" Rowan stared at her, a hint of something, maybe appreciation for her observation, in his eyes. "Because that wasn't the delivery, Sienna. That was another briefcase. One that was already there. And it shouldn't have been." He explained, his voice low and measured, making sure she followed every point. "When I got down there was already a steel case sitting on the crate. Identical to this one." He nodded toward the briefcase on the seat. "But the dead drop agreement was for a single package delivered directly to me by hand. Not a pre-staged one." "So, you found a briefcase that wasn't yours in your spot?" she summarized, trying to picture the scene. "Precisely. It was an unauthorized, sloppy insertion. And that is a huge problem in my world. I secured that unauthorized package, the one you saw, and was wiping it clean, getting ready to analyze it when you stumbled in." He paused, letting the severity of the situation sink in. "The delivery I was expecting, the real one, is still missing. And now I have two problems. A missing courier carrying what I need and a highly secure package, the one you saw, that was dumped by an unknown party at the same location." Sienna suddenly understood the true scope of the danger she had crashed into. She hadn't just interrupted a man hiding. She had interrupted a man trying to sort out a massive, dangerous double-cross. "The first briefcase, the one in the storage room," Sienna whispered, remembering the feel of the cold cement floor and the tension in the air. "Did you open it?" Rowan gave a grim half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't open unauthorized packages on site, Sienna. That's how you end up in a bag in a Jamaican dumpster. But it felt heavy. Very heavy. And whatever was inside, someone wanted it gone and wanted me to find it." He looked straight at her. "This is the warning, Ms. Mallory. You saw the first case. You know it exists. And you know I was down there looking for another one. If anyone, the people who dumped the first case or the people who took my real courier, finds out, they will assume I told you everything. And they will come for you to shut you up." He reached across the small table, his fingers picking up the loose sugar packet she had left. He crushed it slowly and methodically into dust between his strong fingers. "You understand? Your ex was a bruise. This is a death sentence. You mention me, you mention that briefcase, you mention any of this to anyone. A friend, the police, a journalist, and you are signing your own termination paperwork. For your own safety, you need to pretend the last hour never happened." Sienna felt a wave of cold resolve wash over her. She wasn't an idiot. She had seen the way Colton had backed down instantly. She understood the unspoken power dynamic and she understood the gravity of the secret. "I won't say anything," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. She didn't sound like a terrified baker anymore. She sounded like a woman fighting for her life. "I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I just ran from my ex and some guy told me to leave the neighborhood. That's all I know." Rowan studied her face for a long moment, A moment so intense it felt like he was peering into her soul. Finally he gave a slow, rare nod. Good, he said. He reached into his coat and placed a small simple cell phone on the table, the kind with buttons and no fancy apps. It looked old-fashioned, almost like a prop. Take this. It's clean, untraceable. If you see Colton near your bakery or if you see anyone looking for me, you call this number. It rings directly to a secure line. You give the location and hang up. Do not speak. Do not ask questions. Do not save the number. If you feel compromised, you destroy the phone. Sienna picked up the phone. It was cold and light in her hand. It felt like a tether to a life she never wanted, but also a lifeline she desperately needed. Rowan stood up, his height dominating the small booth. He picked up his legitimate steel briefcase. Now go home, Sienna. Your ex won't be back tonight, but you need to prepare for tomorrow. Your problem isn't just Colton anymore. It's the fact that you might know a Mafia boss who is looking for a missing package. Be smart. Be quiet. He walked away without another word, disappearing into the cold night as quickly as he arrived. Sienna was left alone in the diner booth, the untraceable phone resting next to her empty teacup. She felt completely overwhelmed by the chaos that had just entered her life, yet surprisingly calm. She had been given a clear warning, a small, terrifying role to play, and a strange, grudging promise of protection. She was entangled in a world of secrets, steel briefcases, and deadly exchanges, but for the first time she felt truly empowered. She might be involved in something huge, but she was no longer powerless against the small-minded cruelty of Colton Ray. She took a final sip of her tea, wrapped the phone carefully in a napkin, and knew with absolute certainty that her quiet life in Toronto was over. She had a fight to win, and she wouldn't be fighting alone. Sienna knew she should have taken a bus and put distance between herself and Rowan Vale, but when he told her to go home, some deep, exhausted part of her simply obeyed. The thought of checking into a strange, anonymous hotel was less appealing than the terrifying familiarity of her own tiny apartment, even if it meant risking another encounter with Colton. She walked out of the diner and headed toward her building. She kept her eyes low, clutching the burner phone in her pocket, the weight of the new secret settling heavily on her shoulders. She hadn't made it more than 3 blocks when a sleek, black, entirely unremarkable sedan pulled up silently alongside her. The back window lowered slowly and there was Rowan sitting calmly in the spacious rear seat. "Get in, Sienna," he commanded. "You are walking in the middle of the night carrying a sensitive item and you are far too preoccupied to notice your surroundings. I'll drive you home. We need to talk before you are entirely alone." Sienna hesitated for only a second. Despite the danger he represented, she knew that in that moment in the dark, Rowan Vale was probably the safest person she could be near. She opened the back door and slid onto the soft leather seat beside him. The interior smelled faintly of expensive wood and new leather, a stark contrast to the dust and grime of the basement. "I thought you had to deal with the missing courier and the unwanted delivery," she said, trying to sound brave, though her voice trembled slightly. Rowan shifted in his seat, the steel briefcase resting securely against his leg. "I do. But your apartment is on the way to where I need to be. And you, Ms. Mallory, are a newly acquired liability. I need to make sure you understand the rules of the game before I let you disappear back into your lavender-scented life." The driver, a large man with a closely shaved head and a dark suit, drove slowly and smoothly through the quiet Canadian streets. The silence in the car was thick, punctuated only by the low rumble of the engine and the rhythmic click of the indicator light at intersections. Sienna found herself studying Rowan. Up close, under the occasional glow of a passing street lamp, he didn't look like a cartoon villain. He looked like a weary, highly intelligent man with an endless supply of expensive suits and a complete lack of normal human warmth. She noticed a faint, almost vertical scar just above his left eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that spoke volumes about his past. "Your ex-boyfriend," Rowan began, breaking the silence. "Does he have access to your bank accounts? Financial records? Anything that ties you directly to your business?" Sienna nodded slowly. "He used to manage my bookkeeping for a few months when we first dated. He knows my vendors, my rent payment dates. He knows I rely on the bakery completely. That's why his threats about ruining me are so effective." "Sloppy," Rowan muttered, shaking his head. "Rule number 1. Never mix business with personal weakness. You need to change everything. Immediately." Tomorrow morning you change your locks, your account passwords, and you contact a lawyer about a restraining order. A lawyer won't make him stop, Sienna whispered, clutching the burner phone. The police won't make him stop. Rowan turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. No, they won't. But it sets up the necessary paperwork for when I have to make him stop, should he come back and pose a threat to my new arrangement with you. You provide the legal framework, I provide the finality. The coldness of the statement was breathtaking. It wasn't a promise of murder but a promise of eradication, delivered as casually as asking for the salt. Just then the phone in Rowan's hand, a sophisticated non-burner model, vibrated silently. He glanced down at the screen. Sienna watched his already stoic face harden, the subtle tension in his jaw tightening almost painfully. He read the message, then pocketed the phone without replying. The atmosphere in the car, already tense, became instantly frigid. The courier is still missing, he said, his voice flat, dangerously devoid of emotion. But my people found something else. The unauthorized briefcase you saw in the storage room. The one that shouldn't have been there. Sienna leaned forward slightly. Yes. It contained a list of names. Code names mostly. People within my own organization. People who have been highly trusted for years. He let the sentence hang in the air, allowing Sienna to connect the dots. The unauthorized briefcase wasn't just a random drop-off. It was a carefully planted bomb designed to expose a rot deep inside his operation. Someone is leaking information, Sienna concluded quietly. And they planted that list for you to find. Rowan looked at her, and this time the appreciation was more definite. You catch on quickly, Ms. Mallory. Someone is betraying me. They used the dead drop, a location only a handful of people knew about, to signal me that they are compromised or that they are doing the compromising. Either way, someone inside is a rat, and that list they left for me is either a roster of the rats or a roster of people they want me to think are the rats. The stakes had just skyrocketed. Sienna hadn't just interrupted a deal. She had witnessed the beginning of a dangerous internal civil war within a criminal organization. The briefcase she saw was a declaration of war. And the missing courier? She asked. Is he involved? Rowan sighed, a sound that held immense weariness. That's the question. Was he a casualty of the betrayal, or was he the one carrying the real goods to the traitor? All I know is that the contents of the real briefcase are now in the wind, and whoever planted that list is sending a very clear message to me about what they know. The car finally slowed to a stop outside Sienna's familiar brownstone apartment building, tucked away on a leafy side street. A small piece of North American domestic life that suddenly felt utterly fragile. This is your stop, Rowan said, his gaze fixed straight ahead. You forget everything about this car. You forget my name. You don't touch that phone unless Colton appears, or unless you see strange cars or faces near your bakery. Do you understand the severity of this? Your life depends on your silence. Sienna nodded, her hand gripping the door handle. I understand. I won't let you down, Mr. Vale. I won't risk what you're risking. Rowan finally turned to look at her one last time, his expression complex. I'm not risking anything for you, Sienna. I am simply eliminating potential loose ends by making sure you survive long enough to keep my secret. That's all this is. But even as he said the chilling words, his hand reached out and with an unexpected lightness, brushed his gloved finger across the bruise on her wrist. The touch was fleeting, almost non-existent, but it conveyed something deeper than his harsh words. Change your locks first thing, Sienna, he instructed, his voice lower now. Get a good night's sleep. And be prepared to fight for your bakery because I have a feeling the fighting is just beginning for both of us. He didn't wait for her to reply. The driver silently opened the door and Sienna stepped out onto the cold pavement. As the black sedan pulled away, smoothly merging back into the city traffic, Sienna stood on the sidewalk watching the taillights disappear. She was exhausted, terrified, and yet strangely galvanized. She had survived Colton, been saved by a Mafia boss, and now carried the knowledge of a corporate betrayal. She was no longer just the baker fighting a bad ex. She was a witness caught between a missing courier and an internal war. But as she unlocked her apartment door, clutching the untraceable phone, she felt a quiet surge of power. She had been given a warning, yes, but she had also been given protection, however reluctant. She walked into her apartment feeling the cold weight of the secrets, but also a fierce determination to be smarter, to be stronger, and to use the strange dark shield of Rowan Vale to finally win back her peace. Sienna's bakery, the Needed Bliss, was closed on Mondays, but her life had a second rhythm. A part-time job shelving and cashiering at a beloved independent bookstore called The Page Turner, nestled in a historic brick building near the university. It was her quiet place, filled with the comforting smell of old paper and coffee, a world away from the steel briefcases and shadowed threats of the previous night. She woke up on Monday morning feeling heavy, as if the basement dust and the weight of Rowan's secrets were still clinging to her. But she had followed his instructions. The first thing she did was call a locksmith, a minor expense she couldn't afford but a necessary one. Then she changed every single password related to her bakery's accounts. She felt a grim satisfaction in cutting off Colton's financial access, brick by boring, essential brick. When she walked into the Page Turner that afternoon, the scent of worn bindings and brewing espresso felt like a balm. The store was quiet, the usual crowd of students and professors still recovering from the weekend. She tied her apron, greeted Mrs. Delgado, the elderly owner, and tried her hardest to think only about sorting the new arrivals on the fiction shelf. She was focused on a stack of novels, meticulously aligning them by author when she felt it, that prickly, unsettling sensation of being watched. It wasn't the kind of casual glance a browser gives a shop employee. It was intense, fixed, and persistent. Sienna slowly raised her head, pretending to check the top shelf. Across the narrow aisle near the history section stood a man. He was tall and powerfully built, dressed in a thick, dark, expensive-looking winter coat, the collar pulled up slightly. Despite the warmth inside the store, he wore a pair of dark leather gloves. What made her blood run cold was his face. It was entirely unremarkable, average hair, average features, but his eyes, when they finally flicked up and met hers, were sharp and cold like shards of ice. They didn't hold the aggression of Colton. They held the vacant, calculating stillness of someone on assignment. He wasn't browsing for a book, he was staking a claim. He didn't acknowledge her with a nod or a smile. He simply stared, then slowly moved his gaze back to a shelf of brightly colored travel guides. But Sienna knew he wasn't reading the descriptions of the English countryside or the beaches of Jamaica. He was watching her reflection in the glass of the display case. Rowan's world didn't stay separate, she thought, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Rowan had said his problem was a missing courier and an internal leak. Now, just 12 hours later, a mysterious, professional-looking man was shadowing her, an ordinary baker and part-time bookseller. This man wasn't a coincidence. He was proof that someone had already connected her to the basement, or worse, to Rowan Vale. Her hands started to tremble, the fear making the new books in her hand feel impossibly heavy. She discreetly slipped her hand into her pocket, confirming the presence of the burner phone. "If you see anyone looking for me, you call this number." She needed confirmation. She needed to know if this man was here by chance or by design. Sienna forced herself to act normal. She walked slowly to the end of the aisle, grabbed a dust cloth, and began wiping down the top of the poetry shelf, moving closer to the mystery man's position. She heard him move too, silently shifting his weight. She looked up again, this time catching him checking his wristwatch. A large, heavy, expensive timepiece, with a precise, impatient gesture. He wasn't waiting for a book recommendation. Sienna took a deep breath. He had to take a risk. She dropped the dust cloth on the floor near his feet. "Oh, sorry," she murmured, bending down to pick it up. The man didn't move an inch. He didn't offer to help. He just stood there, his shadow falling over her, his attention fully fixed on her sudden, small movement. Sienna stood up quickly, looked directly at him, and forced a polite bookstore employee smile. "Can I help you find anything? Are you looking for something specific? We just got in a great new collection of Canadian poetry." The man paused, and when he finally spoke, his voice was flat, with a faint, unfamiliar, almost mid-European accent. It was practiced and emotionless. "No thank you," he said, his voice quiet. "Just looking for a quiet place to read." But his eyes didn't match his words. They didn't hold the warmth of a book lover. They held the calculation of a hawk. He was lying. This wasn't a reader. This was a lookout. Sienna backed away, her heart hammering. She managed a weak, "All right, let me know if you change your mind," and retreated to the safety of the main counter. She went straight to Mrs. Delgado, who was working on the computer. "Mrs. D," Sienna said, keeping her voice low and even, "I don't feel well." I think I'm coming down with something. Is there any chance I could leave early today? Mrs. Delgado, a kind woman with silver hair, looked up with immediate concern. Oh dear, of course, Sienna. You look pale. Go home. We'll manage. Sienna grabbed her purse from the staff room. As she walked toward the front door, she risked one final glance. The man in the winter coat was gone from the history aisle. Instead, he was standing near the large window, pretending to look out at the street but clearly watching the front entrance. Sienna knew she couldn't leave through the front door. She had to call Rowan, but not with this man watching her every move. She slipped into the tiny, cluttered staff washroom and locked the door. She pulled out the burner phone, the dark, ugly little device that was her link to the darkness. She quickly punched in the single number programmed into the phone. The line rang only twice before it was picked up. No greeting, just a low, sharp exhale of breath. Speak, Rowan's voice commanded. It was strained, tense, and utterly alert. Sienna kept her voice to a whisper. He's here. At the page-turner. Tall, dark coat, quiet, watching me. He knew I was here. She heard a brief, sharp noise on Rowan's end, perhaps a chair scraping back or a document being crushed. Description. Rowan demanded. Average face, very cold eyes, expensive coat, big watch. Not local. He spoke, but he's not Canadian or American. Stay exactly where you are, Rowan instructed, his voice dropping further, hardening into metal. Do not move. Do not leave the building. Do not call the police. That man is not Colton. He is professional. He is not here to threaten you. He is here to confirm your relationship to me. Stay hidden. I will send someone. Do you understand? Yes, Sienna whispered. I'm in the washroom. Locked the door. Good girl, he said. It wasn't a term of endearment, but a sharp acknowledgement of her obedience. 30 minutes. Wait. The line went dead. Sienna leaned her head against the cold, tiled wall, taking a series of long, shaky breaths. The walls of her familiar bookstore suddenly felt paper-thin. Her worlds hadn't just collided. Rowan's world was actively hunting her, trying to trace the string that led from her baker's hands back to his internal betrayal. 15 agonizing minutes later, there was a quiet, firm knock on the washroom door. Sienna. It's Mrs. Delgado, the owner's kind voice whispered through the wood. A courier is here for you. He says he has an important package. He looks very serious. Sienna's heart leaped. Rowan sent someone. She unlocked the door. Standing outside wasn't Mrs. Delgado, but the driver of Rowan's black sedan, the large, silent man with the shaved head. He didn't speak. He simply lifted one hand, revealing a small, folded piece of paper. On it, written in Rowan's distinctive, elegant script, was one single word: lavender. It was the name of her signature shortbread. It was their code. It was the confirmation. Sienna nodded, grabbing her purse. Thank you for the delivery, she said to the driver, loud enough for Mrs. Delgado to hear. The driver turned to Mrs. Delgado. The package is secured. No signature required. Then he looked straight at Sienna, his eyes holding the same unwavering focus as Rowan's. We are leaving now. Quietly. Sienna followed him out of the washroom, past the counter and straight to the door. She didn't look at the man in the winter coat who was now staring openly at them, his average face a mask of annoyance. They walked out of the store. The mysterious man in the coat immediately left the window and was clearly mobilizing to follow. But Rowan's driver was faster. He rushed Sienna into a different car than the night before, a common light gray SUV, already waiting at the curb. The door slammed shut and the car pulled away, tires gripping the pavement, leaving the man in the coat standing alone on the sidewalk, caught off guard. As they sped away from the quiet haven of her bookstore, Sienna slumped back against the headrest, the relief warring with the terror. She had escaped, but the terrifying truth was undeniable. Her peaceful life was over. She was now a recognized connection in Rowan's dangerous game, and she had no choice but to rely on his chilling protection. But as she looked out at the familiar streets of Toronto flashing by, she didn't feel despair. She felt a strange, fierce pride. She hadn't collapsed. She had called for help, followed instructions, and escaped. She might be walking into a dark future, but she was walking with purpose, and for the first time in a long time she wasn't afraid of the fight. The drive away from the bookstore felt like a blur. The driver, a silent mountain of a man named Boris, maneuvered the plain SUV through the afternoon traffic with practiced ease. Sienna sat rigid in the back seat, the small burner phone feeling like a lead weight in her hand. They didn't go far. Boris pulled into the underground parking garage of a massive modern skyscraper in the financial district, a setting that felt worlds away from the cozy grime of the basement or the dusty charm of the bookshop. He ushered her into a secure elevator that whisked them up what felt like 100 floors. When the doors opened, they stepped directly into a large, luxuriously appointed apartment, more like a penthouse office. The entire wall overlooking the city was made of glass, giving Sienna a dizzying view of the entire Toronto skyline. And there was Rowan Vale. He was standing by the window, the steel briefcase resting on a sleek marble table beside him. He wasn't in his coat anymore, just a perfectly tailored charcoal shirt and trousers. He looked less like a man hiding and more like a king surveying his domain. "You're late," he stated, turning away from the view, his eyes immediately assessing Sienna. "We had company," Boris rumbled, his voice startlingly deep. He was moving on her, boss. "I had to go silent and fast." Rowan nodded curtly to Boris, who disappeared into an adjacent room. Then he turned his full attention to Sienna. "You did well, Sienna. You stayed quiet and you called the number. Now tell me everything that man did. Every detail." Sienna recounted the encounter quickly and clearly. The man's expensive coat, his strange stillness, the flat, accented voice, and the way his eyes had held no curiosity, only cold calculation. Rowan listened without interruption, his face impassive. When she finished, he walked over to the marble table and picked up a slim, silver pen, tapping it lightly against the steel briefcase. "That man," Rowan confirmed, his voice low and dangerous, "was not looking for an address. He was looking for confirmation of a link. He's not one of my people. He belongs to the Scalia family, our rivals in New York, with major operations spread across North America and into the Caribbean." Sienna's breath caught. The Scalia family? A rival mafia? So they knew about the dead drop location. "Worse," Rowan corrected, giving a tight, humorless smile. "They not only knew about the location, they were likely involved in the interference. The Scalias operate on the principle of disruption. The man you saw, he's what we call a cleaner. He confirms a target, then disappears, and the target is dealt with later. His presence at your bookstore miles from the dead drop means they have already connected the dots." He walked toward her, forcing her to look up at him. "Someone in my organization who is working with the Scalias, the traitor, must have mentioned that they saw a woman run out of the basement. A panicked witness. The Scalias didn't know who you were, so they ran your local police profile, Colton's domestic complaints, your business address, and found you. So they think I'm involved?" Sienna asked, feeling a sickening lurch in her stomach. "They don't think you're involved. They think you are my asset," Rowan stated. "They believe you saw the unauthorized briefcase, the one with the list, and that I gave it to you for safekeeping, or that you know what happened to the missing courier who was carrying the real exchange. In their world, a witness who is retrieved by my security team in a hurry is automatically deemed a conspirator." The true weight of her situation crashed down on her. She wasn't just a witness. She was a target in an ongoing, violent internal war. Rowan walked back to the window, staring out at the cityscape. "This changes things, Sienna. Before you were a risk to my secret. Now you are a threat to my survival. If the Scalias think I've involved a civilian, they'll use you to destabilize me. They'll come at you hard and they won't be quiet about it." Sienna wrapped her arms around herself. "What are we going to do? I can't hide forever. I have a bakery. I have a life." "You had a life, Sienna. That ended the moment you slammed the storage room door shut. The Scalias don't negotiate with assets. They eliminate them." He finally made a decision, a visible hardening of his posture. He turned, looking directly at her with a fierce, unwavering intensity. "There are only two choices now. One, I can put you on a plane to a remote corner of the UK or somewhere else entirely, and you live the rest of your life terrified and looking over your shoulder, hoping no one ever connects your new identity to the old one. Or two, you stay with me." He didn't wait for her to process the gravity of the choice. "If you stay, you are under my protection. You will be monitored, moved, and instructed on everything. You will be cut off from your bakery, your friends, and your entire past. But you will be safe. I will use you as bait to flush out my internal traitor and to draw the Scalias into a fight on my terms." Sienna stared at him, the fear churning in her stomach. The thought of abandoning her life, her bakery, her whole world, was devastating. But the thought of being hunted down by professional killers, men who made Colton look like a schoolyard bully, was paralyzing. She looked at Rowan, recognizing the cold, unyielding power radiating off him. This man was dangerous, ruthless, and entirely self-interested, but he was also the only reason she was still breathing. "If I stay," she asked, her voice steady despite the internal chaos, "what happens to Colton?" Rowan gave a look of absolute dismissal. "Colton Ray is a distraction. He's already been flagged. If he comes near your building or your bakery again, he'll be handled. He will cease to be a problem. Consider that a down payment on your cooperation." Sienna took a deep breath. She wasn't just choosing protection. She was choosing survival, and she was choosing a dark path that promised justice for her petty tormentor, bought at a terrifying price. "I stay," she said, her voice firm. "But I want to know everything. I want to understand who is trying to set you up. If I'm going to be bait, I need to know the fishing hole." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, a slow, grudging respect entering his eyes. He gave a nod that was the closest thing to approval she had ever received from him. "Good choice, Sienna," he said. "Welcome to the family business. Now the first thing you need to know about the missing courier is that his name is Finn. And he's not just an employee, he's a relative. And if he's the one who betrayed me, this isn't just a business problem, it's a blood feud." Sienna knew then that her life had irrevocably changed. She was caught between a murderous rival faction, a massive corporate betrayal, and a fierce, terrifying family feud. But as she looked at Rowan, the man who had just promised her protection, she felt a powerful, if grim, determination. She was going to survive this, and maybe, just maybe, she could help bring a little bit of the justice she craved into his dark, complicated world. Rowan didn't waste a second after Sienna agreed to stay. Boris was immediately dispatched with a short, clipped set of instructions, and within the hour Sienna found herself bundled into the back of another nondescript vehicle, leaving the gleaming penthouse far behind. The drive was long, taking them out of the bustle of Toronto and deep into the quiet, snow-dusted countryside. They traveled for hours, passing through small towns and eventually turning onto a long, winding dirt road that led into a heavily wooded area. The destination was an isolated property, a large, comfortable, single-story house made of dark cedar and stone. It felt less like a hideout and more like a luxury cabin in the remote woodlands of upstate New York or British Columbia. "This is a safe house," Rowan explained as they walked inside. The house was spotless, minimally furnished, and absolutely silent. "It's off-grid, secure, and known only to a handful of people I trust completely. For now, this is your world." Sienna walked through the spacious living area, gazing at the massive stone fireplace. It was beautiful, but the luxurious isolation felt terrifying. She was trapped, even if the cage was gilded. "I need to understand what happens now," Sienna said, turning to face him. Rowan was placing the steel briefcase, the legitimate one he'd secured from the storage room, on a heavy wooden desk, treating it with the reverence one might show a dangerous antiquity. "Now we wait," Rowan replied, his voice calm. "The Scalias know I pulled you out. They'll be watching your bookstore, your apartment, and your bakery for a few days, waiting for you to resurface. When you don't, they will make a move, thinking they can force me to bring you out of hiding." He poured himself a glass of water from a dispenser and offered one to Sienna. She accepted, the cool water doing little to settle the heat of her anxiety. "I told you I'd deal with Colton Ray," Rowan continued, looking directly at her. "Boris conducted a deep sweep on him after your call from the bookstore. And we found something interesting." Sienna stiffened. "What is it?" Colton's sudden, intense aggression over the past few weeks wasn't just a bitter ex looking for money. He was escalating his demands, escalating his threats, and escalating his violence with a purpose. Rowan took a measured sip of water. He was being paid to do it. The words hit Sienna with a dizzying force. Her ex-boyfriend, her personal tormentor, had been a paid tool. The pain and the fear had been manufactured, a deliberate, cold-blooded plan. "Paid by who?" she whispered, the betrayal far deeper than she had ever imagined. "We haven't confirmed the final source, but the trail leads directly to a shell company in the Cayman Islands that is a known financial front for the Scalia family," Rowan revealed. Sienna felt a surge of white-hot anger, eclipsing her fear. "They hired him. They used Colton to create chaos in my life. To make me desperate enough to flee. They were using him to prime the pump, Rowan corrected. They knew Colton was violent and unpredictable. They hired him to keep you stressed, distracted, and vulnerable. The Scalias didn't know about the dead drop yet, but they clearly saw you, a local woman with an unstable ex, as a potential vulnerability to exploit if they ever needed to put pressure on my operations here in Toronto. Rowan paused, his expression growing dark. They didn't just want you desperate. They wanted you running. They wanted you so panicked you might slip up, say something, or simply be easier to grab if they needed leverage. Sienna felt her past pain, the bruises, and the sleepless nights suddenly gaining a terrifying new meaning. Her private life hadn't been private at all. It had been a pawn on a much larger chessboard. So, my running into the storage room that night. It was a complete accident, but it looked like their plan worked? Sienna asked, trying to rationalize the horrific coincidence. Exactly, Rowan confirmed. Your chaos collided with my chaos. The Scalias had you under pressure just in case they needed to use you. When the betrayal went down in the basement, and they heard about a panicked woman fleeing the scene, they immediately activated the connection they had already established. Colton. He sighed, the sound holding a rare note of disgust. They paid him to push you, and when you ran to hide, they used that moment to plant their cleaner at the bookstore, confirming their suspicions that you were involved in the missing courier situation. The reality of the conspiracy was overwhelming. It tied her personal heartache directly into the international multi-million-dollar criminal war. She was no longer just a victim of domestic violence. She was an unwitting target in a mafia operation. Rowan, sensing her distress, sat down on the leather sofa, his cold eyes watching her. Sienna, this is why you must understand the rules of my world. The person you were is dead. You cannot return to your life until this war is over. And you cannot trust anyone who isn't in this house. And who is in this house? She challenged, needing to know the boundaries of her protection. Just you and me for now, Rowan replied. Boris will be close, securing the perimeter. I am going to use the time here to figure out what is in this case. He tapped the steel briefcase. And how the traitor in my organization is communicating with the Scalias. You are going to rest, eat, and learn to keep your fear silent. Sienna walked over to the large glass window, looking out at the endless frozen woods. She thought of her small lavender-scented bakery, her kind neighbors, and the simple rhythm of kneading dough. All gone. She felt a profound sadness for the innocence she had lost. But then she thought of Colton, a man so utterly devoid of moral compass that he would accept payment to terrorize her. And she thought of the Scalias, the criminal puppet masters who saw her pain as a cheap tool. The sadness was instantly replaced by a cold, hard rage. She turned back to Rowan, her eyes blazing with a fierce resolve that surprised even him. I won't be bait, Mr. Vale, she declared, her voice strong and clear. I'll be an active part of this. They used my pain against me. They hired the coward. I want to help you figure out who the traitor is. They brought my past into your war. Now I'm bringing my determination into your fight. Rowan looked at the transformation in her face, the terror replaced by a burning desire for revenge. His lips curved into the slightest of smiles, a fleeting expression that somehow looked more dangerous than a frown. Good, he said, nodding slowly. A victim is a liability. A motivated ally is useful. We start with the briefcase. I need to know what the Scalias wanted me to find. Now come here. We need to figure out how to crack this open without setting off any hidden surprises. Sienna walked toward the desk, toward the mysterious, silent steel case that symbolized everything she had lost and everything she was determined to reclaim. She was in a secluded house in the middle of the wilderness, her life controlled by a mafia boss. But for the first time in months she felt completely, fundamentally safe from the abuse of her past. She had traded a small, petty nightmare for a gigantic international one, but in doing so she had gained a protector, a purpose, and a fierce new sense of hope that justice, however unconventional, would finally be served. The atmosphere in the secluded safe house shifted from tense waiting to focused, high-stakes work. The cedar-paneled living room was now dominated by the heavy wooden desk, where the unauthorized steel briefcase sat like an armed trap. Rowan had secured specialized tools, delicate probes, a small torch, and a series of complex locking picks, from a hidden compartment in the wall. He worked with an intense, quiet concentration that Sienna found both unnerving and mesmerizing. He was a master craftsman in the most dangerous of trades. These cases are designed not to open, Rowan explained softly, not looking up as he examined the recessed locks. If you force them, they either incinerate the contents or they trigger a small explosive charge that destroys the evidence and anyone standing nearby. It's a message that some secrets are meant to die with their holder. Sienna stood back, watching his long, strong fingers manipulate the tools. He worked with the patience of a surgeon, not the brute force of a criminal. Why would the Scalias risk sending you a bomb? Sienna asked, keeping her voice low. They wouldn't. If they wanted me dead, they'd use a sniper, not a delivery, Rowan replied, his voice barely a whisper. This is a signal. It's supposed to be intimidating, not lethal. But we still treat it like a bomb until it proves otherwise. After nearly 20 minutes of agonizingly slow, precise maneuvering, a faint, almost inaudible snick echoed in the silent room. Rowan exhaled slowly, pulling the probes away. He looked at Sienna, his slate eyes serious. Stand back, he instructed. I open it carefully, one side at a time. Sienna retreated a few steps, her hands involuntarily covering her mouth. Rowan slowly lifted the heavy lid of the steel briefcase. There was no explosion, no flash of fire, only a rush of cold, dry air. Inside, the case was lined with thick padding and held only a few items. There were 3 items, to be precise. A stack of heavy stock encrypted documents, bound tightly with a rubber band, a small military-grade flash drive, encased in clear plastic, and a slim, sealed manila envelope resting right on top. Rowan removed the manila envelope first. He didn't tear it open. He carefully sliced it along the edge with a razor-thin letter opener, treating it like evidence. He pulled out the contents, a handful of black-and-white surveillance photographs. Sienna moved forward tentatively as Rowan fanned them out on the desk. They weren't photos of him or the dead drop or the Scalia family. They were photos of Sienna. Sienna gasped, clutching her chest. The first photo showed her leaving her bakery, the Needed Bliss, weeks ago. She was wearing a different coat, laughing on the phone, carrying a grocery bag. The second was a close-up, grainy shot of her in her small apartment window, seemingly unaware, drinking coffee. The third photo was of her and Colton, taken from a distance, standing outside a coffee shop, looking like any regular couple. These were taken weeks ago, Sienna whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and violation. Before I ran into the basement. Before I ever knew you existed. Rowan's face was dark, his gaze fixed on the photos. This confirms it. The Scalias, or the traitor, had been building a file on you long before the dead drop. They identified you as a potential weak point. A civilian with an unstable life who had connections to my operations, however remote those connections might be. Sienna looked at the photo of herself and Colton. They were preparing to use me against you. Colton's escalating violence wasn't just abuse. It was a distraction, a cover story for the surveillance. He was a perfect way for them to get close without drawing attention. Rowan swept the photos aside, his patience wearing thin. It gets worse. Look at this. He pushed the documents toward her. The pages were covered in dense blocks of code and specialized financial terminology. Rowan quickly used his secure computer setup to decrypt the first page. The screen immediately filled with columns of figures, names, and dates. This is an inventory list, Rowan explained, pointing at the glowing screen. It's a ledger of assets, resources, and personnel being systematically moved out of my control and funneled toward the Scalia family. The person who planted this briefcase is telling me who is being stolen and how. Sienna leaned in, her eyes skimming the list. She might not understand the details, but the pattern was chillingly clear. Entire warehouses, long-term investments, and key personnel were being redirected. A massive, devastating double-cross planned and executed with surgical precision right under Rowan's nose. It's a blueprint for dismantling your syndicate, Sienna realized, feeling the coldness of the betrayal. The person who planted this isn't just a rat. They're trying to take everything. Rowan's jaw was set. This list, he said, his voice flat with suppressed rage, contains people I trusted for 20 years. They were family. The Scalias didn't just find a traitor. They seduced one. And the one thing they wanted me to see was how deep the knife goes. He then picked up the small flash drive and plugged it into a dedicated port on his computer. A single, encrypted folder popped up on the screen, labeled only, Mallory. Rowan opened the folder. Inside was a single highly detailed profile document. He clicked it open. Sienna peered over his shoulder and gasped. The document contained her full name, social insurance number, banking details, mortgage information, and a comprehensive psychological profile, all concluding with a chilling assessment. Asset viability, high. High emotional leverage via domestic trauma. Easily manipulated into acting against veil interests. The horrifying truth was laid bare. She wasn't just a random bystander. She had been a carefully selected target, her personal pain categorized and weaponized. This profile, this level of detail is impossible for an outsider, Rowan said, his voice a low growl. This had to come from inside my organization. My team has access to these databases. The traitor didn't just pass information to the Scalias. They helped the Scalias identify vulnerabilities. They used my own resources to build the case against me. The realization hit them both. The Scalias had used an internal accomplice to vet Sienna, then hired Colton to activate her vulnerability. The entire confrontation in the basement wasn't an accident. It was the final stage of a long-planned setup, interrupted only by the timing of her panicked flight. Sienna felt a profound mix of hurt and righteous fury. They hadn't just watched her. They had judged her, catalogued her suffering, and planned to use her collapse for their own gain. Rowan finally looked at her, and for the first time his usual coldness was fractured by a look of sheer, lethal determination. "I apologize, Sienna," he said, his voice quiet and intense. "I dragged you into a small complication. I didn't realize until now that you were the key to their entire plan. They expected me to find you, to use you, and then they would expose my use of a vulnerable civilian to discredit me with my allies." He reached out and gently, surprisingly, covered her hand with his own. "You are no longer an asset and you are no longer bait. You are a civilian who has been deeply harmed by my enemies. The protection ends now. This is my fight to finish, and they just gave me the reason to finish it." Sienna squeezed his hand back, her eyes unwavering. "No, Rowan. They tried to use my worst weakness against you. But they failed. They woke up a fighter. You gave me the courage to stand up to Colton, and now you've given me the evidence to stand up to them. I'm staying. I'm going to help you find the person who did this. They don't get to win by hurting people like me." Rowan looked at the sheer conviction in her eyes, the genuine raw desire for justice, something absent in his dark world. He didn't argue. He knew that simple, honest fury was a far more powerful weapon than any fear. He nodded once, definitively. "All right, Sienna. Then let's find the traitor. And we start with the one name that appears on both the betrayal ledger and the internal contact list, Finn Vale." Sienna stood beside him, watching the damning profile on the screen. She was trapped in a Mafia war, armed only with her courage and the unwanted attention of powerful rivals. But she was no longer trembling. The painful wounds of her past had resurfaced, not to destroy her but to fuel a fierce new resolve. The fight was terrifying, but she was smiling. A determined, challenging smile, because she knew for the first time she was fighting on the side of justice and she was no longer fighting alone. The revelation that the mole was Finn Vale, a relative and Rowan's missing courier, had initially thrown Rowan's usually unshakable calm into disarray. But as he absorbed the information in Sienna's profile, the careful clinical selection of her as a target, he realized the problem was much larger than a single disgruntled cousin. The sophistication of the planning hinted at a mind outside of Finn's usual capabilities. Rowan had a secure communication system set up in the safe house, a dedicated satellite link completely separate from his main network. He spent the next day on the phone, not shouting threats, but conducting quiet, meticulous interrogations of the very few people who knew about the safe house and the dead drop location. Sienna watched him work. She saw the true nature of his power. Not just violence but absolute control, detailed planning, and an uncanny ability to read loyalty. He was talking to his inner circle, his consigliere, scattered across North America, each conversation clipped and cold. He was asking questions designed not to confirm loyalty, but to measure the size of the lie. "It's not Finn," Rowan finally declared late that evening, hanging up the phone after a particularly intense call. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of exhaustion Sienna hadn't seen before. "Finn is clumsy. He's impulsive. He doesn't have the patience to build a profile on a civilian over weeks. He might steal, but he doesn't orchestrate." "So, someone else used Finn?" Sienna asked, sitting on the sofa near the crackling fire. "Someone used him and someone is giving him cover," Rowan confirmed. The courier exchange was Finn's job. If he was the rat, he would have delivered the real briefcase and taken the fake one away. But Finn is missing and the real briefcase is gone and the fake one was left for me. That suggests a very clever redirection. He turned to a sleek monitor displaying a complex web of organizational charts and security access codes. He had cross-referenced the names on the Scalia's betrayal ledger with the limited list of people who knew the exact timing and location of the dead drop. The person who planted that fake briefcase, Rowan explained, pointing to the glowing screen, had to know exactly where and when I was going to be alone. Only one person outside of Finn and myself had that intimate level of access, and the motive to betray me. He stabbed a finger at the screen, landing on a name circled in red, Angelo Crest. Sienna looked at the name. It meant nothing to her, but the sheer gravity in Rowan's posture made the name feel like a thunderclap. Who is he? Sienna asked. Rowan looked up and for a moment, the coldness in his eyes was replaced by a deep, sharp pain. Angelo. He's my brother in all but name. We grew up together in the Brooklyn projects. We built this syndicate together brick by brick. He was my chief strategist, my closest advisor. My family trusted him completely. Sienna immediately understood the scale of the wound. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was a lifetime of trust shattered. Angelo Crest is the mole, Rowan continued, his voice heavy with disbelief. He had access to all my financial vulnerabilities, my security schedules, and my personnel databases, the same databases used to create your devastating profile. He pulled up a digital file containing Angelo Crest's records. The photos showed a distinguished-looking man, early 40s, with a warm, easy smile, the complete opposite of Rowan's icy composure. The Scalias didn't just seduce him with money, Sienna. They gave him a promise. The control of my entire operation with their backing, Rowan deduced, his mind working quickly, trying to build the timeline. Angelo has been planning this for years. He orchestrated the movement of assets and, more importantly, he set the stage for the public fall. How does that involve me? Sienna pressed, still haunted by the surveillance photos. Rowan looked at her, his gaze intense. Angelo used you, Sienna. He knew I value a quiet, clean operation. He knew that the one thing I would never do is involve an innocent civilian. He ran a deep sweep on local vulnerabilities, found your profile, the domestic violence, the financial stress, the desire to run, and he marked you as the perfect pawn. Rowan walked over to the desk, picking up the surveillance photo of Sienna leaving her bakery. The plan was genius in its cruelty. Angelo hired Colton to intensify the chaos in your life, forcing you to flee, forcing you to seek help. Then, when the dead drop was compromised, Angelo leaked the existence of a female civilian witness to the Scalias, knowing they would check the local police logs and find the frantic woman running from her ex-boyfriend. The goal wasn't to hurt me, Sienna realized, feeling a cold knot form in her stomach. The goal was to force you to protect me. And then once you protected me, Angelo or the Scalias would expose me, a civilian baker protected by a mafia boss, to the authorities or the media, proving you are unstable, desperate, and involving innocents in your crimes. That would turn your own allies against you. Precisely, Rowan said, nodding grimly. He was trying to use your victimization to dismantle my reputation and my power structure. He knew that exposing me as a man protecting a fragile civilian would make me look weak and reckless to my old-school allies. Finn was just a distraction, probably sent away with the real briefcase and instructed to go silent, making it look like he stole everything. The betrayal was total, the plot elaborate, and the use of Sienna's personal pain as a weapon was calculated and chilling. Rowan picked up the small burner phone, his finger hovering over the screen. Angelo thinks he has me cornered. He thinks he's exposed my weakness, my unexpected, reluctant protection of you. He expects me to run. Sienna looked up at him, her fear now completely replaced by shared resolve. He sees protection as weakness. We need to show him it's your strength. You didn't run and you didn't abandon me. That's not a liability, Rowan. That's a difference. Rowan looked at her, the woman who had walked into his life terrified but was now facing down the architect of his demise. He felt a fierce, strange loyalty to her simple courage. We call his bluff, Rowan declared. Angelo planted the fake briefcase for me to find, and he had Finn deliver the real goods to the Scalias, probably in the Caribbean where they are strongest. He thinks I'm trapped here, focused on the internal leak. He turned back to Sienna, a plan already forming in his eyes. We are going to use the very thing Angelo tried to weaponize, your existence, to draw him out. Angelo Crest will not expect me to bring a civilian into the heart of the fight. But that is exactly what we are going to do. Sienna stood up, her jaw set. She knew this was the point of no return. She was no longer hiding. She was marching into a war fueled by the betrayal of a childhood friend and the cold, calculated use of her own suffering. Where do we start? She asked, ready to follow his lead. Rowan looked out the window at the dark, silent forest. We start by sending a message that I am not running. We are going to make a public move that will force Angelo Crest to show his hand. And to do that, we are going to need to go somewhere Angelo never expected you to surface. New York. Sienna felt a surge of adrenaline replacing the weariness. Her past had been weaponized, but now she was stepping into the darkness with the one man who saw her not as a pawn, but as an ally. The betrayal was deep, but her resolve was deeper, and she was ready to fight for the strange, dangerous justice Rowan Vale offered. The isolated cabin, which had felt briefly like a fortress, now felt like a cage filled with explosive secrets. The revelation that Angelo Crest, Rowan's closest friend, was the traitor, and that her entire past, her pain, her bakery, even her ex-boyfriend, had been catalogued and weaponized, had been building a pressure cooker inside Sienna. The decision to go to New York was the final straw. She couldn't handle another step into the dark without understanding the root of the rot. Sienna found Rowan in the secure communications room, meticulously packing the steel briefcase, ensuring it was ready for travel. The cold precision of his movements, even as he planned a massive confrontation, was maddening. "Rowan, stop," Sienna said, her voice shaking not with fear but with a deep, consuming exhaustion. He paused, glancing at her. "We have a tight schedule, Sienna. We leave in 20 minutes. What is it?" "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, walking toward him, her hands clenched at her sides. "I can't just keep moving forward with your plans. I know I'm a key, I know I'm a target, but I don't understand why. Why me? Why was my life so perfectly primed for this? What did I have to do with your organization before I walked into that basement?" Her eyes were welling up, but she fought the tears, focusing on the terrible, overwhelming need for the truth. "You told me Angelo used your databases to find a vulnerable civilian. But that psychological profile, the details about my emotional leverage, the photos taken weeks ago, that's too specific for a random search. What the hell do you people want from me? What am I missing?" She didn't wait for him to speak, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "My life was quiet. I was baking bread, paying my rent, and dealing with a horrible man. And now I find out that horrible man was hired to terrorize me, that my pain was charted in a file called Mallory, and that I'm being hunted by an international crime syndicate. Just tell me, Rowan. Tell me why my life is in your damn documents." Rowan stared at her, absorbing the raw emotion, the genuine, breaking panic of a person who had been used and catalogued without their knowledge. He saw the genuine, unvarnished fear in her eyes, not of him but of the absolute cold cruelty of the betrayal. He gently closed the briefcase, locked it, and placed it on the floor. He walked over to her, his intense gaze unwavering. "You're right, Sienna," he said, his voice dropping, softer than she had ever heard it. "The profile was too specific. Angelo didn't just run a search on random civilians. He searched for people with a history that could be manipulated. He searched for the children of men who once worked for me." Sienna froze, the tears finally starting to track paths down her cheeks. "What are you talking about? My history? I'm a baker. My mother was a librarian. My father was a construction foreman. He died in a work accident 5 years ago." Rowan paused and then delivered the truth with a brutal, quiet honesty. "Your father, Edward Mallory, was a construction foreman, yes. But that construction company was owned by a subsidiary of my organization. He was very good at his job. But he was also a genius with numbers, Sienna. When we needed to hide profits, manage complex payrolls, and handle cash flow that couldn't go through the usual channels, we brought him in as an accountant." Sienna staggered back a step, gripping the back of a chair for support. No, that's impossible. My father hated crime. He was the most honest man I ever knew." "He was honest," Rowan agreed, his voice surprisingly gentle. "But he was also deeply in debt after your mother's illness. We offered him a way out. Money, security for his family, and a promise that he would only be accounting, never touching the violence. He saw it as a temporary measure to save his family. He was very effective, very loyal. And he died in an accident, Sienna whispered, the words tasting like ash. A construction accident. Rowan's eyes hardened, a return to his old self. That is the official report, yes. That is what your mother and you were told. But your father was trying to leave us, Sienna. He was trying to get clean. He tried to take copies of the financial ledgers with him, ledgers detailing money laundering, payrolls and key names as collateral so he could walk away safely. He took a slow step closer to her. He didn't die in an accident, Sienna. He was killed. He was eliminated for attempting to compromise the organization. Sienna's mind was reeling, her reality shattering around her. Her father, a kind, honest man, was a criminal accountant, and his death was a murder, not an accident. The tragedy that had shaped her adult life was a lie designed to cover a crime. Who? She choked out, her voice ragged. Who killed him? Rowan's expression was grim. We never found the direct contractor. But the order was given by the executive team at the time. Angelo Crest was one of the men on that executive team, Sienna. He was the chief strategist. He knew every detail of your father's finances and his death. The pieces snapped into place with sickening clarity. Angelo had access to the records of her father's employment, his debt, and his execution. The profile marked Mallory wasn't a random hit. It was a targeted selection based on a generational debt and a deep, cruel knowledge of a family tragedy. He didn't just use my trauma, Sienna whispered, the truth cutting through her fear like a blade. He created the circumstances for my trauma. He was responsible for my father's death. And then he used the daughter of the man he killed to try and ruin you. The rage that flashed across her face was transformative. A raw, pure fire. It wasn't the petty anger against Colton. It was a fierce, lethal need for ultimate justice. Rowan looked at the sheer hatred in her eyes, and he knew he had finally given her a reason to fight that was far stronger than any need for survival. Sienna, the man who set you up, who hired your ex, who charted your pain, is the man who killed your father, Rowan stated clearly. He knew that if you ever learned the truth you would seek revenge, and that emotional recklessness would compromise me. Now you know. The decision to fight is yours, but I need you to understand that this is no longer about my organization. This is about justice for your father, and the man who took him from you is Angelo Crest. Sienna wiped the tears from her face, her eyes now dry and utterly focused. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. Only a hard, sharp certainty remained. She looked at Rowan, the man whose dark world had swallowed her family and now offered the only chance for retribution. My life is already over, she said, her voice low and steady. My father was murdered, and the man who ordered it is using my pain to kill you. I'm going to New York. I'm going to help you expose Angelo. I will not rest until he pays for what he did to my father. Rowan nodded slowly, a profound respect in his gaze. He walked back to the desk, picked up the briefcase and held it out to her. Then the first thing you do is take control, he said. You carry this. From this moment on, you are no longer the baker, Sienna. You are my most trusted associate, and this briefcase is the proof of Angelo's betrayal. It is the key to our victory. Sienna took the heavy steel case. It was cold, hard, and terrifyingly real, but as her fingers wrapped around the handle she felt an incredible surge of strength. She had been devastated by the truth, but the pain had transformed into purpose. She was heading into the heart of a Mafia war, armed with a terrible secret, but she was smiling. A fierce, avenging smile, because she knew she was no longer a pawn. She was a daughter seeking justice, and that was the most powerful weapon of all. The confrontation in New York was supposed to be on Rowan's terms, a surgical strike to expose Angelo Crest. But Angelo was always a step ahead, proving why he had been Rowan's chief strategist for so long. They were in a safe yet unassuming brownstone in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, preparing for the next move. Sienna had the steel briefcase, containing the damning ledger and her own profile, resting beside her. She felt ready, determined, and focused. Then the world shattered. It happened quickly and violently. There was a sudden, sickening sound of the main door being kicked in, followed by the heavy rush of men wearing tactical gear. Boris, Rowan's ever-present security, was out of the room on a final surveillance run of the area. They were alone. Rowan reacted instantly, shoving Sienna hard toward a small reinforced panic room concealed behind a bookshelf. Get in. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone. But Angelo's team was too fast and too numerous. Before Sienna could reach the hidden latch, two large, masked men grabbed her, pinning her arms behind her back. She dropped the briefcase with a metallic clang. Rowan whirled around, a weapon appearing silently in his hand, his eyes blazing with furious realization. Angelo. Don't be a fool. Angelo Crest stepped out from behind his men, his usual warm smile replaced by a cold, triumphant smirk. He was wearing an elegant suit, contrasting sharply with the paramilitary gear of his hired muscle. He looked every bit the powerful, calculating rival. Fool Rowan? Oh. I'm simply preempting your clumsy efforts. Angelo's voice was smooth, carrying the cultured ease of a man who controlled every move. He glanced at Sienna, now struggling violently in the grip of his men. Besides, you weren't thinking clearly when you brought her into my city. She's the weak point, always has been. Let her go, Angelo. The fight is between you and me, Rowan warned, his voice low and laced with lethal promise. Angelo chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Is it? I don't think so. This is perfect. This is how I finally win. She is the bait, Rowan. She is the lever that pries the confession from your cold little heart. He stepped closer to Sienna, his eyes looking her up and down with unsettling familiarity. Sienna Mallory. The daughter of the man who stole from the family. How poetic. Sienna struggled harder, twisting her head to look at the traitor. You killed my father, Angelo. You set me up. This is about your power, not justice. Angelo's smile widened, but his eyes remained frozen. Justice? Oh, that's where you're wrong, my dear. I didn't kill your father, Edward. Rowan did. The statement hung in the air, a devastating, sickening punch. Sienna froze, her struggle ceasing instantly. She looked from Angelo's triumphant face to Rowan's stunned, angry expression. What? Sienna whispered, the word hollow with sudden dread. Angelo nodded conspiratorially toward Sienna. See how surprised she is. Rowan keeps his hands clean, but he is the one who gives the final order. Your father, Edward Mallory, was trying to take the ledgers and walk away. He begged Rowan for mercy, saying he was doing it for his daughter. And Rowan, always the pragmatist, gave the order to silence him. He turned to Rowan, his voice rising in dramatic accusation. You remember that meeting, Rowan? The one where we decided that Edward Mallory was too much of a risk? You signed his death warrant, my friend. I merely ensured the details were tidy. Rowan's eyes flashed with pure, terrifying fury, not just at the accusation, but at the look of stunned horror on Sienna's face. That's a lie, Angelo. A venomous, desperate lie. Rowan spat. I opposed that execution. Edward was useful. I wanted to keep him in the fold. You orchestrated that decision behind my back, using a false emergency to push the order through. I spent a week trying to find out who gave the final order for the hit. Angelo just shrugged, maintaining his calm, confident lie. Ah, the classic I didn't know defense. Convenient. But Sienna doesn't know that, does she? She only knows that her father, who she believed died in a work accident, was murdered. And one of us is responsible. He stepped back and snapped his fingers. Tie her up. She's coming with us. The masked men immediately dragged Sienna away, one of them grabbing the fallen steel briefcase. The deal is simple, Rowan, Angelo called out, his voice now booming with cold authority. You meet me tonight. Alone. You confess. Publicly to a hidden recording device, that you ordered the execution of Edward Mallory and have been using his daughter as an asset. When the confession is secure, you step down and I take over. If you refuse or if you bring anyone with you, Sienna dies. And I expose your lie to your entire organization regardless. Rowan stood absolutely still, his weapon lowered, his eyes locked on Sienna's face as she was dragged through the door. The moment was agonizingly painful for him. He couldn't afford to kill Angelo's men here. That would guarantee Sienna's immediate execution. Sienna was pulled past the threshold, but before the door slammed shut, she twisted her head back one last time, her eyes finding Rowan's. The look in her eyes wasn't just fear or pain. It was a desperate, agonizing question. Who is telling the truth? The heavy door slammed shut, plunging Rowan back into silence. He was left alone, reeling from the betrayal, the capture of his asset, and the agonizing uncertainty planted in Sienna's mind. He knew Angelo's plan now. It wasn't just to steal the syndicate. It was to destroy Rowan's last remaining shred of honor by forcing him to choose between his power and the life of an innocent woman whose father's death was already a wound in Rowan's conscience. Rowan walked over to the spot where Sienna had been standing, his jaw rigid. He picked up a small metallic object she must have palmed and dropped during the struggle, the burner phone. He looked at the silenced room, the stolen briefcase, and the fresh, cold betrayal in the air. Angelo had won the first move. Now Rowan had to choose how to play the rest of the game. He had to go into a trap to save Sienna, but he had to ensure that when he walked out with the truth and with Angelo crest broken. The past had indeed hunted the future, and now the fate of both Sienna and Rowan hinged on a desperate, deadly gamble. "Boris," Rowan commanded, speaking into a hidden microphone in his cuff, his voice low and deadly calm. "Plan Delta. We are meeting Angelo at the drop site. But first find Finn Vale. He's the only one who knows the truth about that night." The abandoned shipping warehouse was a maze of cold concrete, rusting steel racks, an echoing emptiness down by the docks in Staten Island. Angelo had chosen the location for its dramatic, imposing scale and its distance from the polite society of Manhattan, a perfect stage for a bloody, final confrontation. Rowan didn't wait for Boris to return with Finn. He knew every second counted for Sienna. He drove himself fast and hard, his mind a steel trap of calculation and cold fury. He entered the warehouse alone, just as Angelo had demanded, leaving a silent, unseen network of his men surrounding the perimeter, waiting for his signal. The vast interior of the warehouse was dimly lit by security lights casting long, eerie shadows. The air was thick with the smell of salt, dust, and damp metal. Rowan walked slowly into the center of the vast space, his silhouette framed by the high-loading bay doors. "Angelo. I'm here. Let her go." Rowan's voice echoed sharply off the steel rafters. From behind a towering stack of wooden crates, Angelo Crest emerged, flanked by a dozen heavily armed men. Sienna was with them, tied to a sturdy metal pillar. Her mouth was taped and her face was pale, but her eyes, when they met Rowan's, were wide and searching, a desperate, silent question about the truth of her father's death hanging between them. Angelo smiled, radiating calm, polished malice. He held the steel briefcase, the very case Sienna had secured, in his hand. "Welcome, Rowan," Angelo drawled, his voice carrying easily in the silence. "The grand finale. I told you Edward's daughter was the key to your downfall. She made you reckless." He placed the briefcase on a barrel. "The terms stand. You confess to killing Edward Mallory and step aside. I record it. She lives. You walk away with nothing but your life." Rowan kept his gaze fixed on Sienna, searching for a sign, an answer to the desperate question in her eyes. He had to convince her of the truth even here, surrounded by guns. "Sienna, listen to me," Rowan called out, his voice firm and steady. "What Angelo told you is a lie designed to break our trust. I did not order your father's death. I opposed it. Angelo used a crisis meeting to push the execution order through, and he buried the final details. I swear it. Edward was my best accountant. I had a deep and selfish reason to keep him alive." Sienna struggled against her restraints, her eyes conveying the desperate conflict. The words felt true, but Angelo's story had been so chillingly precise. Angelo laughed, sharp and derisive. "Don't feed her fables, Rowan. Look at the evidence. Edward was killed because he took the ledgers. And who controls the ledger of betrayal now? Me. You brought her here, and now you'll confess to the crime of the father to save the life of the daughter." Angelo pulled a small, expensive dictaphone from his inner jacket pocket and pressed the record button, its tiny red light blinking relentlessly in the gloom. "Confess, Rowan. State that you ordered the execution of Edward Mallory in 2020. Say it and your little baker friend gets to walk." Rowan looked at the circle of guns, then at Sienna. His own survival was secondary. He couldn't let Angelo win by feeding him a confession and simultaneously cementing a lie in Sienna's mind. He made his move, choosing not to save his life but to save the truth. "No, Angelo," Rowan said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "I will not confess to your crime. The order to kill Edward Mallory was signed by you, not me. And I have the proof." Rowan slammed his foot down hard on the concrete floor. The sudden loud sound was his signal. Angelo didn't flinch. You're bluffing, Rowan. You have nothing but an empty briefcase. Rowan just smiled, a cold, terrifying expression that promised pain. The briefcase is empty because I knew you would take it. I have the contents, the ledger, the profile, digitally backed up and scheduled to be sent to every one of my allies and every major law enforcement agency in North America if I die tonight. The only person who can stop that release is me. And I'm not dying until I see you pay for everything you've stolen, including your lie about Edward Mallory. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by an intense burst of sound. The hidden men Rowan had placed outside, Boris and his team, stormed the warehouse, using the loading bay doors and upper windows as entry points. The air instantly filled with the shouts of men, the deafening echoes of gunfire, and the frantic scramble of Angelo's surprised guards. In the ensuing chaos, Angelo pushed Sienna violently aside, knocking the pillar over. The dictator dropped, but the red light was still blinking. Kill him. Don't let him leave. Angelo screamed, ducking behind a heavy crate, his elegant suit now covered in dust. Sienna, dazed but unhurt, hit the floor hard. She used the shock of the fall, leveraging the pillar to keep the tape on her mouth from ripping. She knew she couldn't rely on Rowan's men to untie her in the chaos. I have to fight for myself, she thought, the fire in her heart overcoming the paralyzing fear. She focused her raw energy, wrenching her wrists and ankles against the tight cords. She saw Rowan moving with terrifying fluid efficiency, dodging fire and returning it, working his way toward her. He was fighting the uncertainty of her trust just as much as he was fighting Angelo's men. As a guard rushed past her, Sienna, with a desperate surge of adrenaline born of weeks of terror and the truth about her father, threw her body weight against the pillar, knocking the man off balance and buying herself a crucial second. She was still tied, but she was moving. Rowan, seeing her struggle, used a massive wooden spool as cover, laying down suppressing fire. He made eye contact with her, a brief, fierce look that communicated everything. I'm coming. Hold on. She understood the unspoken message. She continued to twist, the rough rope burning her skin, until she felt a faint tearing. The tape on her mouth finally came loose and she screamed, not in pain but in rage. He's behind the big black crate. Angelo. He's trying to escape. The information was instantly actionable. It was a lifeline of trust thrown back to Rowan. Rowan shifted his attention, using Sienna's intelligence. He laid down a precise, heavy burst of fire near the black crate, forcing Angelo to scramble and preventing his escape. The chaos was contained, the momentum turning back toward Rowan. Suddenly, a guard near Sienna raised his weapon to fire at Rowan's exposed flank. Rowan saw it, but he was too far. Just as the guard was about to fire, Sienna, with a final desperate heave, broke one wrist free of the rough cords. She grabbed the metal pillar, using her freed hand and the remaining ropes as leverage, and whipped the pillar around, striking the guard hard in the legs. The guard cried out, dropping his weapon and falling to the floor. Rowan took the opportunity, eliminating the immediate threat to his life and finally reaching Sienna. He cut her remaining bonds quickly with a tactical knife, his movements economical and precise. You're safe, he murmured, pulling her close for a brief, secure second before pushing her behind cover. Sienna, now free and trembling, looked at him. The agonizing question in her eyes was finally answered. Rowan had risked everything, including his carefully orchestrated plan, to save her and to prove the truth of Angelo's betrayal. Angelo is getting away, she yelled over the roar of the fight, pointing toward a side maintenance door. Rowan looked at her, his lips curving into a grim, determined smile. He knew he had her trust back, and that was worth more than any confession. He won't get far, Rowan promised. He turned, the intensity of the fight reflected in his eyes. The confrontation was still raging, but the objective had shifted. Sienna was safe, and their trust was solidified in fire and blood. She stood behind the cover, her heart pounding, no longer a victim, but a survivor ready to witness the final, inevitable victory of justice. The fighting ended as quickly as it began. Angelo's men, disorganized and caught completely off guard by Rowan's tactical infiltration and Sienna's brave distraction, were quickly subdued by Boris and his team. Angelo himself, having tried to slip out a side door, found his escape path blocked by a silent, uncompromising Boris. He was captured, disgraced, and contained. The warehouse floor was a mess of splintered wood, scattered documents, and spent shell casings, but Sienna and Rowan stood unharmed in the center of the wreckage. Sienna was leaning against a heavy crate, her heart still hammering, but her gaze was fixed intently on Rowan. She needed the final absolute truth, the answer to the agonizing question Angelo had planted. Who killed her father? Rowan walked over to her, his face grim with the weight of the moment. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind raw exhaustion. Angelo is secured, Rowan said quietly. His men won't be a problem. But we need to talk, Sienna. About your father. Angelo's lie was the cruelest move he had left, but it wasn't just a lie to hurt you. It was a lie to cover a much bigger truth. He looked around the warehouse, then reached down and picked up the battered steel briefcase that had fallen when Sienna was kidnapped. It was the key to everything. Sienna, I told you the truth about my opposition to Edward's execution. I did fight to keep him alive because he was too valuable. But there's a part of this story that I haven't told you. A part one didn't know until I analyzed the files in this briefcase more closely at the safe house. He placed the briefcase on a clean surface. Your father, Edward Mallory, was supposed to be killed for stealing the ledgers, Rowan confirmed, his voice low and serious. The order was given by Angelo and another executive while I was out of the country. They staged the construction accident and they cleaned up the scene. But the assassination team they sent, they were loyal to me, not Angelo. They were following my orders from years ago. If anyone in my inner circle gives a kill order on a highly sensitive asset without my direct, final approval, they are to fake the execution and alert me. Sienna's eyes widened in disbelief. Fake? The execution? Rowan nodded. Edward Mallory was never killed, Sienna. He didn't die in an accident and he wasn't murdered by my syndicate. He fled. The revelation hit her with a staggering force, replacing her grief with a disorienting, dizzying hope. Her father wasn't dead. He's alive, she whispered, tears flooding her eyes again, but these were tears of overwhelming relief. He is alive, Rowan affirmed. The men faked his death, covered his tracks and helped him disappear. They sent me a coded message confirming his escape and their loyalty. Why didn't you tell me this before? Sienna demanded, her voice thick with emotion. Because I couldn't, Rowan explained, his hand resting on the briefcase. Edward Mallory didn't just take my syndicate's sensitive ledgers. He took highly encrypted data that involved not just me, but the Scalia family and 3 other major criminal organizations operating across North America and Europe. Edward has enough information to destabilize the entire criminal underworld. If I tried to find him or even contacted you, I would have signaled that he was alive and still a threat. His only safety was absolute silence and complete disappearance. Rowan looked her straight in the eyes. The lie protected you, Sienna. If you had known he was alive, Angelo or the Scalias would have watched you even more closely, waiting for the one slip that would lead them to Edward. He reached into the briefcase and pulled out the encrypted document, the betrayal ledger Angelo had planted. He pointed to a small, almost undetectable anomaly within the code. Angelo planted this list to frame my loyalists and distract me. But he made a single careless mistake. He included a tiny, complex string of code in the files detailing the missing assets. It wasn't a financial reference. It was a clue, a breadcrumb that Edward left behind to signal someone that he was still out there, or perhaps, to signal the person he trusted most. Sienna leaned forward, her heart pounding. What is it? Rowan pointed to the code string. It's a series of numbers that looks like a bank account, but it's too long. When you cross-reference it with the geographical data Edward handled, it converts to a set of coordinates that lead to a very specific remote location in rural Jamaica. He looked up at her, a profound gravity in his expression. Edward didn't just steal the ledgers. He stole the key to take down 5 major criminal organizations. And now, the briefcase, which was intended to expose my weakness, has given us the only solid lead to his current location. Sienna reached out and touched the encrypted documents, her fingers trembling over the cold, hard paper. Her father was a hero, not a victim. He hadn't just run. He had gone into hiding, taking the evidence needed to ensure justice, not just for his family, but for everyone his former employers harmed. He left a clue in the documents he stole, Sienna realized, tears of pride now mixing with relief. He wanted someone to find him eventually. He wanted to finish the job. And you, Sienna, are the only person who can follow that trail without exposing him, Rowan stated, his eyes intense. You are the only person who can go to a quiet, remote location like that without drawing the suspicion that a career criminal would attract. You are his daughter. You are the only person he would trust to find him. Rowan paused, letting the magnitude of the new mission sink in. The fight with Angelo is over, but the war is just beginning. Now the Scalias know Angelo is compromised and they are hunting the briefcase. We need to go after Edward, secure the evidence he holds, and use it to put an end to this entire cycle of betrayal and violence. Sienna looked down at the documents, then back up at Rowan. The pain of the past was gone, replaced by a fierce, undeniable purpose. She wasn't an innocent civilian anymore. She was the daughter of a courageous whistleblower, armed with a powerful ally and a mission. Then we go to Jamaica, Sienna declared, her voice firm, resolute. We find my father and we finish the job he started. Angelo tried to destroy me with lies, but he only gave me the truth, and the truth is the only thing that can destroy him. Rowan nodded, his cold eyes gleaming with a rare, satisfied intensity. He had found a partner in the most unexpected of places, a partner fueled by a righteous, personal mission. The darkest chapter of betrayal was closed, and a new chapter built on hope, truth, and the pursuit of justice was about to begin. We have come to the end of the story. Thank you for watching to the end. Share your opinion about this story in the comments below. I like getting feedback from my audience. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories.